My name is Daniel Hart, and I've lived my whole life in a small countryside town, tucked between fading hills and crooked pine trees. Life here was simple, predictable even, the kind of quiet that most people in the city would call boring, but I called it peace. I worked at a lumber yard just outside of town, my hands rough and stained from years of lifting timber. My wife, Marlene, was the softer half of me, a school teacher with a laugh that filled every empty space in our little wooden house. We'd been married 8 years by then, and though we never had much, we had each other, and that was enough to make the evenings warm. I used to come home smelling like sawdust, and she'd tease me for it. I can still hear her voice, clear as day, before everything changed. Marlene and I had our routines, like most married couples do. Saturday mornings meant breakfast at the diner near the river. Sunday evenings were for slow walks down the narrow lane behind our house. We had friends in town, a few neighbors we trusted, and a rhythm to life that seemed unbreakable. But sometimes, I think, comfort blinds you. It lulls you into thinking bad things happen somewhere else, to someone else. Everything about those nights feels like another life now, like a memory sealed in amber, untouched by the shadows that would soon creep in. It began subtly, the way most tragedies do. Marlene started complaining about pain in her stomach, at first mild, then sharper. She tried to ignore it, brushing it off as stress or bad food. But within days, her face grew pale, her appetite vanished, and I could see something in her eyes. Fear, though she tried to hide it from me. I remember lying awake at night, listening to her breathing in the dark. The sound of it uneven, fragile. I felt helpless, like watching a candle flicker in the wind. I told her we needed to see a doctor, but she insisted it would pass. Only when she collapsed near the kitchen sink one morning did I realize this wasn't something that would go away on its own. Our town had only one hospital, an old stone building on the edge of the woods. It had been there for decades. I'd passed it countless times, never thinking I'd one day need it. It always looked cold, even in daylight, with paint peeling from the window frames, and ivy crawling up the outer walls. The locals said it used to be a war infirmary long ago, though no one really talked about that. I remember driving Marlene there in our pickup truck, her hand trembling in mine. The road wound through dark trees, and the radio hummed low static. I tried to stay calm for her sake, but every turn seemed to pull us closer to something I couldn't name. Something waiting. Inside, the hospital smelled of disinfectant and damp plaster. The corridors were narrow, the lights dim and buzzing faintly, as though half the bulbs had already given up. A young doctor, Dr. Hales, examined Marlene carefully and frowned when he looked at her test results. He spoke in a low, professional tone, explaining that there was some internal blockage, something that required surgery. My stomach dropped when I heard the word surgery. He reassured us that it was a routine procedure, that it would take place the following Friday night. "We'll take good care of her," he said, patting my shoulder, but his eyes looked tired. That night, I sat beside Marlene's bed, holding her hand, pretending to believe him. The week leading to the operation felt endless. Marlene stayed admitted for observation, while I came and went between home and hospital. Each night, the place seemed to grow darker, as if the walls absorbed the daylight. The nurses were polite but distant, moving quietly down the halls like shadows in white uniforms. By Thursday, I barely slept. The thought of something going wrong haunted me, creeping into my dreams. Marlene tried to smile, telling me she'd be fine, that I worried too much. But there was a heaviness in her words, a tremor that mirrored my own dread. I didn't know why, but I had a strange feeling about that hospital, a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful at all. The night of the surgery finally came. The doctor told me to wait outside the operation ward. The halls were silent except for the faint hum of an old ceiling fan and the occasional echo of metal trays. It was around 10 p.m., and the hospital seemed almost deserted. I sat on a hard bench under a flickering light, counting the seconds. I could hear muffled voices from inside the operating room, or maybe I imagined them. Time stretched, each minute slower than the last. My nerves twisted until my hands trembled. Then, sometime past midnight, I noticed movement at the end of the corridor. A figure approaching slowly, the sound of shoes dragging softly against the floor. It was a nurse, or at least, she looked like one. Her uniform was stained slightly, her hair untidy, and there were dark circles under her eyes, as though she hadn't slept in days. She didn't smile, she just stared at me for a few seconds before speaking. Her voice was low, almost slurred, like she was exhausted or medicated. "You're Mr. Hart?" she asked. I nodded, uneasy. "Your wife's surgery. The doctor wants to speak with you. Please come with me." My heart dropped. "Is something wrong?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just turned and started walking down the corridor. I hesitated for a moment, every instinct telling me to stay put, but I followed. She led me down a hallway I hadn't seen before. The further we went, the colder it felt, the smell of medicine fading into something stale. The walls here were cracked, the paint bubbled, and the lights dimmer still. I asked where we were going, but she didn't respond, her pace steady, almost mechanical. I felt like I was walking into a place no one else used anymore. Finally, she stopped at a small room near the end of the corridor. "Wait in here," she said softly. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick and musty. A single dim light hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly. Old medical machines sat in the corners like sleeping relics, covered in dust. There was a small table and 2 chairs in the center. "The doctor will come shortly," she said. Her voice didn't match her face, calm but hollow. Then she asked for my name, address, and a few personal details, jotting them down on a clipboard that looked as old as the machines around us. I answered nervously, wondering why she needed them now. When she was done, she gave a faint nod, then turned and left. The door clicked shut, and the sound of her footsteps faded down the hall. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The silence pressed in around me, and the light above flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. My stomach churned with unease. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking of a clock somewhere far away, the distant creak of a floorboard. I kept staring at the door, expecting it to open, but it didn't. My thoughts spiraled. What if something had gone wrong in the surgery? What if that nurse had brought me here to tell me bad news in private? Or worse, what if she wasn't supposed to? I couldn't shake the memory of her eyes, glassy and unfocused. There was something not right about her, something broken. I stood up, thinking of going back to the waiting area, but the hallway outside seemed darker than before. Just then, I heard faint footsteps, but not from the door. They came from behind the wall, like someone pacing in the next room. The door opened suddenly, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Another nurse stood there, younger, cleaner uniform, alert eyes. "Mr. Hart, what are you doing in here?" she asked, confusion written all over her face. I stammered, explaining that another nurse had brought me, said the doctor wanted to see me. Her expression changed from confusion to alarm. "Who?" she demanded. I described her. Tired face, trembling hands, pale skin. The young nurse froze. Then, almost under her breath, she muttered, "Not again." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "You shouldn't be here. Come with me now." Her tone left no room for argument. As we walked back down the corridor, she kept glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might follow. I noticed her hands shaking. "What's going on?" I pressed, but she wouldn't answer. "It's not my place to say," she murmured. The hallway felt longer than before, every fluorescent light humming like a trapped insect. We turned a corner, and for just a second, I swear I saw her. The first nurse. Standing near the stairwell door at the far end, her face half hidden in the dark. She held something metallic in her hand. Maybe surgical tools or a clipboard. I couldn't tell. I blinked, and she was gone. I froze mid-step, my throat dry. The other nurse tugged my arm gently. "Don't look," she whispered. When we reached the main reception area, the light felt almost too bright. My pulse still hammered in my ears. The nurse guided me to a chair and told me to wait. "Your wife's surgery is still ongoing," she said. "Dr. Hales will update you soon." I nodded numbly, trying to piece together what had just happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about that phrase. Not again. It echoed in my head, gnawing at me. Finally, I asked her directly, "Who was that nurse?" She hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. Then, lowering her voice, she said, "Her name was Clara. She used to work here, years ago, before my time even. She was dismissed after a breakdown." I didn't speak, waiting for her to continue. "Clara was a good nurse once," she went on quietly. "But something changed after an operation went wrong. A patient died under her care. They said she couldn't cope with the guilt. She started wandering the halls at night, confusing patients, asking for details she already had. It got worse. One evening, she locked herself in one of the old operating rooms, the one you were just in. She nearly hurt herself with the tools before security found her. They sent her away for treatment after that." I felt my skin crawl. "So why did she?" I couldn't finish the question. The nurse sighed. "Sometimes, at night shifts, staff swear they see her, but she doesn't work here anymore." I sat there in silence, my mind spinning. It made no sense. I had spoken to that woman, followed her, seen her breathe. Could someone like her still be wandering around after all these years? Maybe she'd snuck back in, confused, living out the same routine she'd been fired from. Or maybe the staff just didn't want to admit something worse. The nurse beside me looked pale now, like she regretted saying anything. "You're safe now," she assured me softly. But even she didn't sound convinced. I kept replaying every second of that encounter. Her eyes, her voice. She hadn't looked entirely present, like she was stuck somewhere between now and then. The minutes crawled by until Dr. Hales finally appeared, his gloves off, sweat on his brow. "Your wife's surgery went well," he said with a tired smile. Relief washed over me so strong I nearly collapsed. Marlene was fine. That was all that mattered. But even as I thanked him, I couldn't stop glancing down the dim corridor behind the reception, half expecting to see that nurse again. Dr. Hales noticed my distracted look and asked if I was all right. I just nodded, unwilling to explain. Something in his eyes told me he already knew. Maybe I wasn't the first to see her. That night, I sat by Marlene's bedside until morning, unable to sleep, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. 3 days later, Marlene was discharged. The air outside felt lighter, freer, though I couldn't shake the sense that the hospital was still watching me as we drove away. I never told Marlene what happened that night. I didn't want to scare her, and besides, I wasn't even sure what to believe myself. Sometimes I wonder if the mind invents things when it's under enough stress. Maybe that's what it was. Exhaustion, fear, imagination. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I remember that first nurse's face and the way she said, "The doctor will come shortly." Her voice still echoes in my dreams. Calm, deliberate, like she's waiting for me to come back. After we returned home, life slowly slipped back into its old rhythm. Marlene recovered well, and soon she was back to her books and her gentle laughter. But something in me stayed behind in that hospital. I avoided that road completely, taking the longer route into town, just so I wouldn't have to see those cracked windows or that ivy-covered wall. A few months later, I heard that the hospital had shut down part of its west wing, the same section where that small room had been. Maintenance issues, they said. But when I asked around, the locals told a different story. Some said a nurse was found wandering there again, dazed, asking for patient files that no longer existed. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I picture her standing at the end of some long corridor, waiting. Maybe she's still lost in that hospital, reliving her last night over and over. Or maybe she was never truly there at all, just a remnant of guilt that refuses to fade. All I know is that when I pass that old building now, boarded up and silent, I can almost see a shadow behind one of the windows. And every time I do, I whisper a quiet prayer for her, and for anyone else who might follow when she calls.